Elon Musk, Jess Phillips deserves to be in prison.
I understand that a strong woman standing up to you is met with such reticence. Can you throw them out?
Police had gone round to the house. They found this 13-year-old girl with another young girl. She was almost completely naked, and she was with 7 adult Pakistani men. South Yorkshire Police arrested the 13-year-old girl for being drunk and disorderly.
And the numbers now, estimated over the last 40 years, possibly 500,000 victims.
500,000.
It was funny that they did absolutely nothing to bring my abusers to justice, but when I went on national TV and talked about the industrial scale of their failings, that they are suddenly spurred into action to come and knock on my door and intimidate me into silence.
Tier Keir charge people for rape and violent crime, charge people for social media posts and memes. The Labour Party must be absolutely freaking out. Elon Musk calls for a new election in Britain. When does Elon's good influence when it comes to a platform that prioritizes free speech, when does that become overreach? Hello everyone, it is Jack. Welcome back to the channel and Happy New Year! Mwah. I'm joined by a very important guest today, keeping me company. Well, I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas and New Year. Welcome to 2025. I'm so excited for this year, so much in store for the channel, and I'm looking forward to seeing how things grow and develop with all of you. So thanks for continuing to support me. And yes, I unfortunately was so sick over Christmas. I had some sort of flu or COVID, so I was absolutely out for about 10 days. And apologies, there's been a bit of a slowing down of content, but I am back, ready to go, and very excited. Now, today we're going to talk about an absolute powder keg, which Elon Musk has unleashed on X, along with many other commentators, about the UK Grooming Gangs scandal, or as I should say, really rape gang scandal, because to call it grooming is to undermine it, really. The stories I talk about today are extremely hard-hitting. Some of it is absolutely harrowing, so I will give you a warning when some of that comes up. I don't usually do trigger warnings, but this stuff is just so horrific that I will tell you when it comes up. And with that said, let's get off to the video. So Elon Musk, Jess Phillips deserves to be in prison over Labour refusal to launch grooming inquiry. Now, this delightful woman, Jess Phillips, she is part of the Labour Party who are in power and who are becoming increasingly unpopular under Keir Starmer, or some people like to call him Keir Stalin, under his administration. Jess Phillips is actually the safeguarding minister, which you're going to see, in my opinion, is quite hypocritical. She's been known for speaking out against the patriarchy and violence against women and girls, which of course is a really important topic, and I'm sure she's done some good impact in some good areas, but there seems to be a double standard with Jess Phillips in her inclination to play down certain narratives that suits her position of power and demonize men in a lot of situations where there is really more going on. What was quite interesting in the recent general election was the first time we saw sectarian politics enter the UK, and by that I mean is when religious influence is coming in to the election. We actually have had 4 MPs, 5 if you include Jeremy Corbyn, that specifically campaigned on the issues of Gaza to be elected, and they overthrew other Labour posts. They seem to be entirely focused on topics in relation to Islam, and one of those MPs recently came under fire when he discussed introducing blasphemy laws to stop people criticizing the Quran, as well as telling Keir Starmer and his own party that they should not outlaw cousin marriages so as not to offend certain communities. Coming up to the election, 2 of our MPs faced harassment and intimidation tactics, as well as others, I'm sure, but this article talks about them. So 2 re-elected female MPs have relayed in sober victory speeches the intimidation and harassment they faced during the general election campaign. Jess Phillips spoke of party workers being filmed in the street and making regular calls to police, while Shabana Mahmood said masked men had disrupted a community meeting, terrifying people in attendance. Now, Jess Phillips only ended up winning on 693 votes, and Shabana Mahmood was also not too far on losing her seat to a pro-Gaza independent candidate. Now, you'll notice that this article does not refer to sectarianism, to Islam, to the reasons these intimidation tactics were playing out. But there were people in these communities who specifically wanted to deplatform these women so they could get a pro-Gaza MP elected, even though Jess Phillips has specifically spoken out herself on a ceasefire in the Middle East. Let's have a look at what happened when Jess Phillips was elected and went to give her victory speech.
Okay, thank you.
See, we're going to continue with the class that we had during the campaign.
Excuse me.
It's all right. The election that I have...
Sharon, this will be a warning. I will be asking people to leave unless we get this completed.
I will carry on with my speech. I understand that a strong woman standing up to you is met with such reticence. Anyway, this election has been... Can you throw them out?
Now, in all fairness to her, I think she handled this not too badly, and it must be absolutely awful having people intimidate you like this, especially when you've just won and want to celebrate your victory, and it was such a narrow result. She must have been worried that she would lose her seat. She held her own, she remained confident, so I'll give that to her, and I'm not going to look at this and laugh, but what should really be being called out is the behavior of these men and the reason that they are intimidating her and heckling her, which is because their pro-Gaza candidate did not win. But what's disappointing about Jess Phillips was her inability to actually call this out as it is. Watch this.
Everything was about driving content. So these people weren't ashamed of the way that they were behaving. They were doing it and filming themselves, then putting it on the internet. So when Sadiq Khan came, like sort of men wearing masks, driving past, shouting, I won't say what they were saying because, you know, it's a family show, shouting stuff about Sadiq Khan's mother. And they're not ashamed. They're putting it on the internet to incite other people to do the same.
Is it sectarian?
It's too simple to say that it's sectarian because, like I say, and people want desperately for me to announce that the people who were shouting at me and barracking me were Muslim men. The fact that they were men is actually quite significant to me. The fact that they were Muslim is not significant because the Muslim people in my constituency didn't behave like this. These people were idiots. They didn't do it because they were Muslim. They did it because they were idiots. And they wanted something for themselves, and they used a terrible tragedy to get that.
So this is where I start to lose respect for her because, you know, it's not fair to brandish all men in this way as bad, and the only reason they did this is because they're men. This is a tactic we often see on the left, just to blame the ambiguous patriarchy. But the reality is, have we seen this kind of behavior at acceptance speeches from other groups of men? Because if it was just a male issue, then we would see towns where there are majority white men heckling their MP because they didn't get their candidate elected. And she didn't repeat the stuff they were saying because that would even point more to the fact that it is sectarian politics we're seeing here at play. She could have alluded to the fact that two things can be true at once. These things aren't mutually exclusive. So yes, them being male can add to it because of the male culture which is found in this subset of the Islam community, but also it is very much driven by their religion and their need to have a pro-Gaza MP. What we're seeing with the Labour Party, which is quite interesting, is historically they have overwhelmingly got the majority of the Muslim vote. So they naturally feel very inclined to defend the Muslim population and have turned a blind eye to complaints, to issues within certain subsets of the communities. And like I mentioned before, we saw this with Keir Starmer inability to condemn a suggestion of a blasphemy law, and also their inability to commit to banning first cousin marriage. And this is totally, in my opinion, because they know they have these portions of the votes and they do not want to lose those people, because there were other candidates who also narrowly won their seat, including the health minister, Wes Streeting, to another sectarian independent. So it's going to be very interesting what happens at the next election when we see both possibly Reform UK de-seating Labour voters, but what if we see more sectarianism dethroning them as well? So what exactly happened with Jess Phillips? Well, there has been a massive scandal for the past few decades in the UK on grooming/rape gangs coming from Pakistani Muslim men throughout many, many towns. So we're going to talk about that today. If you don't know much about it, I'll give you a little bit of background, but it has become increasingly a wider talked about issue, even though it has been known for a long time as well. There was a request to Jess Phillips, the MP for this constituency in which Oldham Council is, to do a national inquiry into the rape gangs throughout the last few decades. So Jess Phillips, who is, remember, the safeguarding minister, unfortunately declined this request. So she said, "That is why I believe it is for Oldham Council alone to decide to commission an inquiry into child sexual exploitation locally, rather than the government to intervene." Now, the issue with this is lots of people feel this council themselves have been complicit in the past in suppressing what has gone on with the abuse of these young girls, mainly white working class girls. If they leave it up to that council who are potentially corrupt, or at least have been in the past, then how do they have a hope of bringing justice for these young women? And she's been known to, in the past, actually criticize the Tory government for their lack of national inquiries, even though they did make some headway on this. We've had some ministers who've been very outspoken on it. Suella Braverman, like many issues, came under lots of fire for calling out the fact that these are Pakistani Muslim men grooming, raping, torturing girls on an industrial level, one that we've never seen in this country before. I think, again, what's coming into play here are Labour's biases in avoiding stirring up racial tensions or losing support from the Islam community. So it's a real shame that this happened. You should be standing up for what's right, trying to make a difference. But then in playing devil's advocate, who knows if she's facing pressure from the corrupt Labour front bench, including Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper, these people. So we don't really know how much is in her hands and not, but either way, she is facing the brunt of this.
Now, this is the scandal that still shames our nation and the people who claim to speak on our behalf. I am, of course, talking about the Grooming Gang scandal, the organised sexual exploitation and rape of young white British girls and women by mainly Pakistani Muslim gangs. Some people call it the Grooming Gang scandal. I think we should just call it the Rape Gang scandal. Now, a court transcript from an Oxford grooming gang trial in 2013 has gone viral in recent days, owing to the horrific details that are so utterly debased, revealing the extent of the nature of the abuse that was handed out to girls as young as 12. And even Elon Musk has weighed in, claiming that reform and the Reform Party, is our only hope.
So what's interesting there is you've heard Matt Goodwin, a political professor, also has one of the largest Substacks in the UK and is very critical on immigration policy in this country, say that these posts went viral because of a 2013 report resurfacing on some of the grooming gangs. And you wonder, well, why has this happened? I think there's lots of factors. I think that the Labour government coming into power have been receiving a lot of criticism for censorship. More people are becoming awake to this. X is now a very different space after Elon Musk took over. Right-wing people, centre-right people, or people calling out reality in regards to stuff like sex and gender are no longer being censored and deplatformed. And then we also have the Reform MPs such as Rupert Lowe, who have been doing far more work to request accurate crime data on ethnicity and nationality, as well as reporting on some of these things. And, you know, once one thing goes viral, then everyone starts talking about it. So that is one thing I'm very grateful for X for, because we can debate these issues, we can try and uncover the truth. This journalist was one of the people to expose what was going on. A journalist who uncovered the Rotherham grooming gang scandal has said that even he massively underestimated the scale of the abuse. So Andrew Norfolk told the BBC that he had absolutely no idea it would name 1,400 girls as victims before the figure was announced at a bombshell press conference. So this is only one town in which this report has said 1,400 girls. And what's interesting about this issue is you see lots of different numbers being reported at both a town level, constituency level, and a nationwide level. It's hard to understand how big was this, but even this 1,400 number shows that it is on an industrial scale, and that's only this town. Grooming girls, you know, it often starts with one of the younger, attractive Pakistani men, sometimes 20 years a senior of a young teenage girl, a vulnerable girl from working class communities, wooing her, love bombing her, before introducing her to his friends, his relatives, relatives, which is just so disgusting, and then proceeding to get them drunk, to give them alcohol, and gang rape them and torture them in the most horrific ways possible. There has been a conceded effort in this country from politicians, from journalists, from mainstream media to suppress all of these stories because of a fear of stirring up racial tensions. And I also will add, actually, the police has been one of the major issues in justice not being served for these girls, in their lack of accountability and lack of willingness to actually do anything, again, because of the racial tensions. So Elon Musk started this tirade a couple of days ago when he quote tweeted a post about this journalist I just mentioned.
One of the very first was from a grandfather who rang from Rotherham, who wanted to talk about his granddaughter. 1 month after her 13th birthday, she'd gone to school and then gone missing, and the school had rung up Mum, who'd immediately rung the police, who'd said, "Don't worry, love, she'll turn up." And at 2:30 in the morning, the next morning, a woman on the other side of Rotherham had picked up the phone and dialed 999 because she'd heard a young girl screaming in the house next door.
There is a warning here on a lot of the stuff from this point on are going to be very horrific and hard-hitting. So if you are someone who is triggered by that stuff, now is your time to exit. And I thank you very much for watching.
Police had gone round to the house. They found this 13-year-old girl with another young girl. She was almost completely naked. She was blind drunk, and she was with 7 adult Pakistani men. She was drunk and leery. And South Yorkshire Police arrested the 13-year-old girl for being drunk and disorderly. They took her back to the station, put her in the cells, eventually charged her, and she was convicted. They didn't even question the men as to why they were in a house with a 13-year-old girl who was nearly naked in the early hours of the morning.
Just absolutely devastating. So you can see that's just one example, and this is an industrial scale all over the UK. In this case, actually victim blaming to such an extent that they arrest the white young girl after she's being gang raped by 7 other men for drunk and disorderly behavior. So with this, I think we're really seeing a mix between the culture we used to have about sexual assault, which was not specific to, this sectarian issue before this Me Too era. A lot of women would not be believed, or outside of these communities, some men would think, well, she was asking for it, stuff like that. It's your word against theirs. But mixed in with this fear over being called racist, we really see devastating results. The way people report on this is interesting, and Julie Bindel, a well-known feminist, interviewed her on my podcast if you want to go check that out. This is an article she wrote in Al Jazeera. This was just last year, the UK's grooming gangs and the lessons never learned. It is high time for Britain's criminal justice system to stop failing vulnerable girls victimized by predatory men. And she says a lot of great things in this article, brave things that need to be said. I will disagree with Julie Bindel on quite a lot. I think she can be quite anti-men sometimes in general. And this is one thing I have to say I disagree on. So she says, the problem is neither immigration nor a particular racial or religious group. The problem is the incompetence of those tasked with protecting the most vulnerable in society and a criminal justice system that is geared to fail all victims. Indeed, there are countless white, British-born men abusing girls and getting away with it in this country. In fact, the majority of child abusers in the UK are white men, most of whom are never reported to the authorities. The police forces working in areas with large Muslim, South Asian populations being reluctant to go after predominantly Muslim South Asian grooming gangs in fear of accusations of racism is just one part of the problem. All of these things can be true at once. There can be a culture of inaction in general in the police. There can be prejudice against working class girls, but it is undeniably an issue in regards to immigration, integration, sectarianism, and culture. The fact of the matter is, if we did not pursue certain policies around immigration, importing certain cultures from places like Pakistan without any heed on integrating them, we would not have seen this type of abuse, this grooming gang nature of abuse, religiously and culturally motivated. And to call out the fact that the majority are white men in the country, that does not refute the fact, we can look at that separately. There are issues among certain white men, I'm sure, in regards to online grooming, for example. We can tackle all these things, but we have to look at them individually and think of the influences, because you can't just say, well, this is just all the police. If these communities were there and integrated and we didn't, do this by design, then all of these girls could potentially have not been harmed. So I really disagree with this take. Now, we talked about that one town that had 1,400 known cases, and I mentioned it's hard to determine the scale of this, but look at this.
Would accept that if we extrapolate nationally, the Jay report on Rotherham, and other reports on Telford and Oxford, there appear to have been upwards of 250,000 young white girls raped in this century, very largely by Muslim men. And given these girls are usually raped several times a day for years, so, my lords, what is the government's answer to the Chief Constable of Northumberland, of Northumbria, who has just said that there is every likelihood that these grooming gangs are operating in every one of our major cities? So, my lords, what is the government doing to prosecute those in authority who turned a blind eye to all this because they were afraid of being Islamophobic and so on? And what is it doing to compensate and help these victims mentally?
So you can see right there, as soon as he says Muslim, there are groans. There is someone saying, seriously? So people would rather avoid the possibility of that being an issue over the protection of these girls. And he gives an estimate of 250,000. I don't know if that's true, but I've heard this cited in lots of other places, and you're going to see even more in just a second. Trigonometry, Constantine Kissin, Francis Foster, big fan of them, assuming most of you know who they are. They interviewed a survivor of the grooming gangs in 2020, and let's look at some of the stuff she had to say.
And where does it mainly happen? Because the words or the name of the town that is most commonly associated with it is Rotherham. Is it just in the north, or does it happen all over the UK?
Well, it's all over the UK. There's lots of different towns now that have been named as being involved. There's Burnley, Blackburn, there's Oxford. Really, there's very few big major cities that haven't had some sort of grooming gang scandal. And the numbers now estimated over the last 40 years, possibly 500,000 victims.
500,000?
500,000 victims over the last 40 years.
Yeah, 500,000. So if that's true, what has happened in this country? This has been one of the biggest scandals in this country in this century. So what does this say about this country? I think it's becoming more and more clear to me. In the West, a lot of people just ungratefully assume that our way of life and what we deem good and evil is the default, and it's just common sense. But in fact, that's not true at all. There's a quote by someone, I forget who it is, but instead of looking at the past as periods of peace interrupted by war, we actually look at it in terms of periods of war interrupted by peace. Even now, all over the world, societies do not view freedom, women's rights, gay people, sex in the same way that we do in the West. People are trafficked, people are enslaved. This is a tweet by Sam Bidwell, and he just gives examples of a lot of the towns. Lots of examples here: Rotherham, Rochdale, Aylesbury, etc.
I was targeted in my late teens. So I had a Pakistani Muslim boyfriend, and that led on within a few weeks to becoming a very controlling, obsessive, religiously charged relationship, and then been taken to different houses, different flats above takeaways around the area, Rotherham, Sheffield, Bradford, to be raped, beaten, strangled, suffocated, tortured, almost drowned to death, suffocated to death, really, really brutally harmed, covered in bruises most of the time, and that lasted over a year. Planned an honour killing, which he persuaded some of his friends to join in with, and I survived an attempted honour killing with multiple lacerations and fractures, and then I was in hospital for over a week. At that point, the police told my parents to move me away and change my name. Which is what they did, and that's how I got out of it.
Yeah, so even though she ended up in hospital after an attempted honour killing, which is just the most horrific concept ever, the police's response was move town and change your name. So this is on you.
Did you approach the police?
Yeah, I went to the police 5 times. At least 5
and
times,
what happened?
5 or 6 times. They just said there's nothing we can do about it.
What?
There's nothing we can do about it. Those are their exact words.
Were you explicit in what you told them? So you said, really, I'm being raped by this guy.
I described really horrific things, and they just said there's nothing we can do about it.
So what's really got me thinking about this is lots of people talk about institutional racism and the corruption of the police in the UK. The thing about it is, the people talking about that on the left actually put it in favor of that black people and people of color are unfairly treated by the police, disproportionately stopped and searched because of racism and all that kind of stuff. Now I can actually say I agree with the accusation of institutional racism, but it's actually, in my opinion, the complete opposite. You know, think of the Chris Kaba case recently, where an officer protected his fellow colleagues from this murderer, this thug who was about to ram his car into them and potentially kill them. He shot and killed the guy, and then he had to be suspended for 2 years and put on trial for murder. So naturally, police are terrified of being accused of racism and losing their livelihoods. And then in this case, we have white girls being affected on an industrial scale, and their response is there's nothing we can do about it. So really, where is the institutional racism happening? This is undeniably racist against white people in favor of protecting these animals, these men, and we would rather defend diversity at the expense of innocent girls.
Because people need to hear it from survivors that these are racially and religiously aggravated crimes. That when I was being beaten, I was being called a white slag, a white whore, a white cunt. That over and over again, the references to my whiteness was always at the forefront of my perpetrator's mind. And that was always linked in with religion and his idea of what a good Muslim was and a bad non-Muslim was. Or a good believer and a bad unbeliever. Even though I was a Christian, even though I have my faith in God, I pray, I believe in heaven and hell, I believe in good and bad, good and evil. So, but in the minds of these grooming gangs, if you're not covered down to your ankles, down to your wrists, if the hem of your top doesn't cover to your knees, then you're asking to be raped.
There you go. Is it possible to be racist towards white people? Absolutely. Racism is racism. It's not brownism. It's not blackism. It is racism.
I have not more heads rolled as a result of this grooming gang scandal.
Thank you for covering this scandal, one of the biggest national scandals in our country's history. And GB News deserves special mention for being brave and courageous, for shining a light on the injustice. Many broadcasters, much of the mainstream media are too scared to talk about it.
So she mentioned there that GB News is one of the few media outlets to report on this, which is absolutely true. What's interesting is that GB News were also smeared recently and accused of being anti-Muslim. And this is, of course, by The Guardian. So GB News accounted for half of all news broadcast coverage of Muslims over a 2-year period, much of it negative, according to new analysis. The findings demonstrate an excessive focus on Muslims bordering on an obsession. So first of all, the fact that they've reported half the stories says absolutely nothing. And what you'll actually learn is that they're one of the few outlets to actually talk about the issues, whereas other outlets avoid it and they don't talk about it. They don't criticize certain subsets of Islam which are causing issues. I look at GB News a lot. I've never seen a racist or deliberately prejudiced accusation against all Muslims. They have reported on stuff like terror, grooming gangs, issues of immigration, all of which were factual and perfectly legitimate to report. You will see that when you look into the origin of this report, it was actually influenced and led by the Muslim Council. And it is just sickening. It's sickening that The Guardian wants to take this stance, but at least there are some outlets that are committed to reporting on facts and not suppressing information that does not suit the left-wing narrative. All right, so now let's look at some more tweets, posts that Elon Musk shared. So Sam Ashworth Hayes, who is a Telegraph columnist, says, it's worth remembering that when cases came to the attention of the authorities, they leapt into action. They buried them in case, investigating inflamed racial tensions. A lot of these screenshots here are from the report from 2013, which is resurfaced. A senior police officer admitted that his force ignored the sexual abuse of girls by Pakistani grooming gangs for decades because it was afraid of increasing racial tensions. After a 5-year police investigation, the Independent Office for Police Conduct upheld a complaint that Rotherham officer told a missing child's distraught father that the town would erupt if it was known that Asian men were routinely having sex with underage white girls. Imagine being a father, being told that by the police, who are supposed to protect you, protect your family, that he can't say anything. People will be hurt. Their feelings will be hurt because we're talking about facts. Now, this next one is just so horrific. This is what a judge said to one of the perpetrators. You, Mohammed Karar, prepared her for gang anal rape by using a pump to expand her anal passage. You subjected her to a gang rape by 5 or 6 men. At one point, she had 4 men inside her. Just how horrific. A red ball was placed in her mouth to keep her quiet. Not only were you both involved in the commercial sexual exploitation, you also used her for your own self-gratification. You both raped her when she was under 13. Under 13. This other person, after raping her, she threatened you with a lock knife. Your reaction was to pick up a baseball bat with a silver metal handle, strike her on the head with it, then insert the baseball bat inside her. You treated her as if she was your commodity. You branded her with your initial near her anal passage using a hot air pin. You know, I feel dirty just repeating this stuff. It is so incomprehensible to me how a human being is capable of this. There's no limits to the human condition, what we can make people believe is okay. And I just can't believe that a young child, many thousands of children have been subjected to not just rape, but this kind of torture. By the way, grooming gang leaders were allowed to stay in the UK when it was decided that deporting them would breach their human rights. Rochdale grooming gang leader still lives alongside victims despite deportation order. You'll see that a lot of these perpetrators, after they were released from prison, some of them on short sentences, in my opinion, were allowed to then just go back into the community where they committed these acts of violence and go on living their lives and potentially go on to reoffend. If these people are immigrants or if they have dual nationality, deport. Like what are we doing in this country? I feel hopeful but worried because the more the Labour Party continue on this authoritarian tirade, the more divided we're going to get. And I don't want to see more riots. I don't want to see actual racism and prejudice towards entire groups happen. You know, I know there's probably lots of Muslims who hate all of this, you know, the majority probably. And I wonder why there are not more movements from the Muslim community trying to call this stuff out. Like for me, for example, I call out gay people all the time because of their views on gender, and I'm kind of viewed as an apostate. But I just feel like we don't see enough of people from the Muslim community leading the way and denouncing these parts of Islam. That's not necessarily because they agree with it. I think it's because the ramifications that can happen when you speak out against this stuff and intimidation, violence are huge, and that's an issue. So we read cases where a child was doused in petrol and threatened with being set alight, children who were threatened with guns, children who witnessed brutally violent rapes and were threatened that they would be the next victim if they told anyone. Girls as young as 11 were raped by large numbers of male perpetrators, one after the other. It's just incomprehensible. This was in Rotherham. From 1997 to 2013, it was imprudent to say anything like this, or even to mention the ethnicity and religion of the perpetrators. It's just so pathetic. What kind of country are we? A Home Office researcher who tried to tell the police and superiors what was going on was sent on a diversity training course instead. I'm starting to view the word diversity as just a scourge on the human condition because it is used in such sinister ways. Any policeman who has not been given formal diversity training must be assumed to be racist. Wow, what an attack on the British way of life. Look at this poster, right? So Rotherham says, blast off for our borough. Welcome to Rotherham, Children's Capital of Culture 2025, created by children and young people for everyone right here in Rotherham. Festival of the Year 2025. This is intentional. Rotherham, one of the worst towns exposed for this industrial rape and torture of girls, is calling themselves the Children's Capital of Culture. How disgusting. A town that subjects its young girls to this should not be able to make a claim like this for decades and decades and decades, you know, and be able to demonstrate very clearly they have changed the culture and they have not even done that. So like, what the hell? So much of what we're being told, and I sound like some crazy Russell Brand conspiracy theorist here, you know, I'm going to do a Candace Owens on you guys now. So much of what we're told is just the opposite of how things are. You know, you can take some things the mainstream media tells you and give a guess that it would be the opposite. You may be correct. Do your research. You don't need to become a conspiracy theorist. Just do your actual research. You know, the facts are available most of the time. Let's hear from another grooming gang survivor.
I went back home. I went back to Telford, and the next day around lunchtime, 2 police officers banged on my door demanding that I speak to them about my interview.
Really? So the police who have done nothing for the entire third millennium to date suddenly were roused to activity by you going on television.
Yeah, they told me that they had gone round to all of the addresses they had on file for me. They had gone to my previous home addresses, the different accommodations that I'd stayed at, looking for me, and eventually they located me. You know, they hunted me down, they tracked me, banged on my door. You know, not too different to when they're knocking on the door of a perpetrator, of a potential criminal. I was on FaceTime to my friend at the time, who said to me afterwards, I genuinely thought you were going to get arrested from the way that they were talking to you. They told me that, quote unquote, when you go on GB News and talk about grooming gangs in Telford, it's our duty to follow up with you.
That's not actually true, is it?
No.
So the police are, among other things, lying to you.
It's funny, I said to them at the time, it was funny that they did absolutely nothing to bring my accusers to justice, but when I went on national TV, my abusers to justice, but when I went on national TV and talked about the industrial scale of their failings and their inaction in bringing to justice the perpetrators of vile rape, grooming, sexual assault and child sex crimes in Telford, that they are suddenly spurred into action to come and knock on my door and intimidate me into silence.
Says it all, doesn't it? You know, she speaks out about it and then they have something to say. And let me live in a country that has freedom of speech. You know, give me a job, someone, please. So Liz Truss, our ex-Prime Minister of 40 days, said, this is Jess Phillips, the same Home Minister who excused masked Islamist thugs. Her title, Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls, is a perversion of the English language. It's very clear whose side she's on. So I agree. And what she's referring to is during the riots, Jess Phillips defended Islamist thugs who took to the streets chanting Allahu Akbar for defending their community. Connor Tomlinson of Lotus Eaters said, strange that Jess Phillips was more obsessed with getting you deselected, he's talking to Liz Truss, as an MP for talking to me, than with getting justice for the girls abused. So just because Liz Truss was on their show and spoke to some of them, including Carl Benjamin, who is apparently such a controversial figure, he has very strong views, but I'm used to seeing all sorts of views these days. Jess Phillips has written to the Prime Minister saying Carl Benjamin, founder of the Lotus Eaters, has despicable views about violence against women. I've never heard what those are, and that Miss Truss should be deselected. So just because Liz Truss, whatever you think of her, spoke to this person, oh my God, she spoke to him. God forbid that we speak to people we might even disagree with to try and understand the needs of the country. Then she needs to be deplatformed. So it's all the same with a lot of these Labour MPs and people on the left. They just view deplatforming as commonplace. Of course you would deplatform this person because they spoke to this evil person that has a podcast that thousands, if not millions of people tune into. Like, it's pathetic. All of this, they can't stand up to scrutiny. So Elon Musk replied to this saying she deserves to be in prison. And now I just want to discuss briefly this stuff with Elon Musk, because I agree with a lot of the stuff Elon Musk is talking about, right? Gender, immigration, the Labour Party, Keir Starmer. So naturally for me, I'm enjoying it a lot and sitting back imagining the Labour Party must be absolutely freaking out when this stuff happens. But I do want to consider the other side here and think, if this was in reverse and this was a lefty loony, how would we be feeling about this? When does Elon's good influence when it comes to a platform that prioritizes free speech and his libertarianism, when does that become overreach? And I do think we're in dangerous waters here, because in the past few days, he has just gone on an absolute tirade, post after post after post. And again, I agree with the vast majority of everything he says, and he's reporting on a lot of factual information. But when does it become overreach that this billionaire, who is not even a UK citizen or resident, starts having this much influence? I'd be very curious to know what you guys think about that, because, you know, if this was in reverse, I wouldn't be happy. People would probably be saying this is corrupt. This is another elite trying to push an establishment view and ruin everything. She deserves to be in prison. That is one thing I disagree with. You know, there's no point saying that. This, I think, is inflammatory, and I don't think that it really adds to Elon's credibility just saying she should be in prison. That is more cancel culture that we're seeing, no matter how vile you think Jess Phillips is. Even J.K. Rowling weighed in on this. She quote tweeted Tom Harris, who said, "Been thinking about Jess Phillips' argument that a national inquiry into grooming gangs would be exploited by the far right." Of course, she's right. Also, that doesn't matter. The truth matters. Only the truth matters. And if others want to exploit it, that is entirely incidental. I have not heard it put like that before, and it is very true. You know, there will always be people who try and take something and skew their narrative, but the truth is more important. We can tackle those issues separately and safeguard against them, but we'll be handing our enemies talking points is the exact same argument used by people who refuse to accept that adopting gender identity ideology was a massive mistake. Institutional cowardice has enabled terrible harm. The solution is not more institutional cowardice. So these politicians, they all know what they're doing when it comes to trans issues, disregarding the safety of children and women, these issues over immigration, they know. But politics is not what it used to be. You know, being an MP used to be a part-time job. And I'm not sure if it was paid. Career politicians now who go to Oxford and then spend their whole careers in politics, they want to keep their cushy job. You know, they expense their energy bills, they expense their council tax and rent on the behalf of the taxpayer. The elites, I just wouldn't underestimate how much staying in power means to them rather than this. Some of them, if I give them some credit, they might think, well, I have to work with the system I have, so I'm going to go along with this narrative to hopefully make more impact in the future. But most of them will never do that. Finally, here's another issue with Elon. So he's also decided to weigh in on the Tommy Robinson stuff. And I get an impression that Elon is a bit reckless. He seems to adopt opinions quite quickly. And I don't know what's true in that. Like maybe he does a lot of research first. But when it comes to some issues, it seems like he is jumping on a bandwagon. And a lot of people are joining this Free Tommy movement. So this says, why is Tommy Robinson in solitary confinement prison for telling the truth? He should be freed, and those who covered up this travesty should take his place in that cell. Tommy Robinson was smeared as a far-right racist for exposing the mass betrayal of English girls by the state. The nation owes him an apology. Now, there is a lot of truth in this. I think a lot of what Tommy Robinson has done is good. He has spoken truth. He started by speaking out against what was happening in his town of Luton with the Islamization, abuse of girls. I think all of that is credible. But I think people are taking far too a sympathetic stance to him as a whole. I think we have to acknowledge that he is in prison for contempt of court. And whether the stuff that he disclosed about this case, I'm not going to go into it, is true or not, the courts determined that it was not true. There was not sufficient evidence. Maybe the court is wrong. Maybe stuff has been covered up, but he was threatened that if he talked about the stuff that he has in this documentary silenced again, that it would be criminal. And he chose to do that. So he likes to play the complete victim. I don't think he deserves so much of the scrutiny he's got, but I have heard that he's also impossible to work with, a cokehead, very unhinged. So I just feel like Elon Musk is weighing in on this when he doesn't perhaps know the full extent of everything. And he quoted his documentary, could all be true, but you're obviously getting Tommy Robinson's view of it there. So I don't know. I just feel like the Tommy stuff is a bit more complicated than the people admit, but a lot of people want Reform UK to support Tommy. And I think they're making the right decision, to be honest. Like, they have to play within the system we have. Despite Tommy Robinson doing many noble things for certain communities, working class communities, he has been in fights. He has conducted himself badly sometimes. And I think people excuse all of that by just saying, oh, well, it's a class issue and it's because he's working class. Yes, that may be part of it. But also he's done dodgy stuff too and behaved quite badly regardless of whether you're working class or not. Who knows? Let me know what you guys think. And we also have, Riley Gaines, Free Tommy Robinson. I think I will give them, it is nice to see the US trying to come in to save us. The free world speaking up for Britain and the stuff going on here. So I do really appreciate that. And any of my American audience, Canadian audience, or wherever you are who have spoken out against this two-tier justice and censorship, I really appreciate it. And hopefully it will make a difference. Hopefully Trump's presidency will make it even harder for Britain to hide these kind of things. So this meme, Tier Keir, charge people for rape and violent crime, charge people for social media posts and memes. So I can't really argue with this, but I just would love to be a fly on the wall wherever Keir Starmer is when he sees this stuff. Like, he must be absolutely outraged about this stuff, but I think it's true. Here he's talking about, the fact that Keir Starmer was the head of Crown Prosecution Services when a lot of these investigations were going on. And there has been a call to investigate the Crown Prosecution Service, Keir Starmer, which has been blocked by the Labour Party. So an inquiry into Keir Starmer's conduct as the head of Crown Prosecution Service while investigating the Oldham child grooming scandal. I don't know enough beyond that to know how complicit Keir Starmer was in this, but I think we have many examples since he took power of his authoritarian two-tier system and demonization of the white working class too, say that it may be a possibility. And Elon Musk is very much supporting reform now, saying only a reform can save Britain. And then finally, Elon Musk calls for a new election in Britain as new poll shows Labour support is plummeting. So again, I love this, you know, because I want Labour to go. I think they're terrible, and who knows where we're going to be in 4 years. But is this overreach? You know, should a billionaire based in another country be having this much influence? That is the key quandary we're facing. I think there could be a happier medium, and he does tweet like an insane person. So that is it today, guys. I want to, you know, pay tribute to all of the young girls who've been harmed by this devastating scandal. I really hope this is the start of the tide turning in terms of people being able to talk about this, pressure on the government and the mainstream media to stop hiding the facts. And I hope more and more justice can be served for all the victims of these crimes and these animals deported or whatever. They can rot in prison for all I care. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think below, and I will see you soon for another video. Bye.